Hey everyone, Reid Henrichs with Reid. The purpose of today's video is to talk about the concept of federalism and how national reciprocity concealed carry would fit into this concept. Now I know that a long time ago people used to learn civics, they used to learn how these functions of government work, these basic foundations. They understood it, they were taught it in school, and their teachers understood how this concept works. So because that's lacking lately, and probably the last at least 10, 15, 20 years or even longer, I wanted to really talk about this video with you to help some of the younger people in high school watching this video, because we do have a pretty large audience of those, but also the people caught in between there, in their 20s, 30s, and sometimes even more than that. To begin with, federalism is dual sovereignty between the state governments and between the federal government of the United States of America. Each one of them is sovereign within its own context. The states are sovereign inside of their own borders, according to the Federalist Papers and according to our Constitution. And the federal government is designed to be outwardly focused. In other words, treaties between the United States and other nations, relationships between states, between the various states. Historically speaking, the states have always been in charge of their own actions and their own lawmaking. For example, when the Declaration of Independence was signed, all 13 colonies, which later became states, entered into that argument against the government of Britain as 13 independent states. They were in charge of their own affairs within each one of their borders. No state had any say over what happened in any other state. For example, people in Virginia could not go into North Carolina and tell them how to conduct their affairs. In fact, the only way that any kind of state intermediary would ever be allowed to enter into another state or even to have any say would be if it was at the request of the other state. For example, if Virginia needed help defending itself, it could ask North Carolina or Maryland or any other state around it to come in and help them, for example, for defense on the frontier, defense against anything else that was threatening to them. When we talk about our federal government, the actual federal government of the United States, the Constitution is absolutely a compact between states. At least that's what James Madison and Thomas Jefferson believed it to be. Madison was one of the individuals largely responsible for calling the Constitutional Convention and organizing everybody together at its inception. So when we think about this, when we think about the actual agreement that these states entered into, they all entered into the Constitution. In other words, entered into the Union voluntarily. They were not coerced to enter the Union. They entered the Union voluntarily as sovereign individual states. So the federal government itself comprises and has a direct impact over what happens relationship-wise between those states, and also between those states and other foreign governments. For example, North Carolina or Virginia or any other state could not enter into a treaty with another country. That's not their role. That's not what they were designed to do by the federal government or by our country's inception or even the Constitution. So when we think about this, I'm going to read a quote from James Madison. So pardon me while I get out the Federalist Papers right here. I'll put a link down below to this book, to this version of it. Federalist Papers explain the Constitution, the concepts within. I'm going to be reading from the 45th Federalist, and this is James Madison as the author. I want you to pay close attention to the words that he uses here. He says, "The powers delegated by the proposed Constitution to the federal government are few and defined." So he says automatically in here, pitching the Constitution to the various representatives of each of the states, that the powers delegated to the federal government are few and defined. Where are they defined? In Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution. That's where those powers are delegated, and they're very specific. Madison was a strict interpretationist of the Constitution, as was Thomas Jefferson. He goes on further to say this, that those which are to remain in the state governments are numerous and indefinite. The former will be exercised principally on external objects such as war, peace, negotiation, and foreign commerce, with which last the power of taxation will be, for the most part, be connected. So right there, Madison, in his own words, says that the federal government is to be focused on external objects, war, peace, treaty negotiations, and taxation related to foreign commerce, which means tariffs. So that's what his vision for the federal government was. At least when he was writing in the Federalist Papers here, that's what his vision was. He goes on to explain about the state government's roles as well. He says the powers reserved to the several states will extend to all objects which, in the ordinary course of affairs, concern the lives, liberties, and properties of the people and the internal order, improvement, and prosperity of the state. So within a state, the state government itself is sovereign, and that is what he says in his own words, is that they are to be the ones that focus on that. Well, how does national reciprocity concealed carry fit in? Right now, I'm sure some people out there are watching and saying, but Reid, you know, each state has its permit system, and, you know, some states are may issue, some states are shall issue, and some states are constitutional carry. Well, in my opinion, folks, all states should be constitutional carry, because that's what the Second Amendment and the Bill of Rights says. The Second Amendment, the Bill of Rights says a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Bill of Rights, we know, are individual rights, the exception being the 10th, which has to do with exactly what Madison was talking about in this statement here. So we have to think about this. States' rights. Does a state have a right to govern the affairs within its own borders? Unequivocally, yes. Madison in the Federalist Papers admits that in his own words, as did many other people. But the problem rests with when we have rights guaranteed to all citizens of the United States, guaranteed and backed up by the federal government. What happens when a state passes laws that infringe upon those rights? For example, we have a First Amendment right protecting free speech, religion, freedom of the press, freedom to petition, freedom to assemble. No state can pass a law that prohibits you from doing that. And furthermore, no state can pass a law that requires that you have to have a permit to exercise your religion, or a permit to exercise your free speech. Some people will argue that they have a right to regulate those rights, that nothing's absolute, yada, yada, yada. But I think it's very safe to say that in the overwhelming majority of situations, that people are not denied those rights based on whether they pay a $20, $30, $100 fee every 5 years. Furthermore, there are states that outright ignore your right to keep and bear arms in general by having may issue, which means at the whim of some stupid sheriff out there that they can just tell you that, oh no, you're not responsible enough to own a gun. Well, that's wrong, and we have to think about this. I am all for states' rights, but not when they violate the Bill of Rights. At this point in time, we are going to argue or debate over the upcoming administration with Trump. And he's going to possibly propose a national concealed carry reciprocity. Is this a good idea or a bad idea? Some people argue one way, some people argue the other. But no matter which way you do your circular reasoning, no matter which train of logic that you follow, it's this, that the right of the people of the United States, that they have a right to keep and bear arms. They have a right to do so. And a right does not include a permit, and a right does not involve paying money to exercise a right or to ask someone else's permission on whether or not you get to do so. That's fundamentally what that is. So whether or not we have a national reciprocity law, or whether or not we have one or not, the bottom line is that the American people have a right to keep and bear arms. Yes, places like you, New Jersey. Yes, places like you, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, California, Illinois, or any other bastion of horrifying civil rights violations. And the Second Amendment is a civil right, by the way. It's a natural right and a civil right. So if you live in a state that violates those, if you live in a state whose government violates that, you live in an unrighteous and absolutely unrepentant, statist, mentally ill government that is running your life. And I can tell you all this right now, that whether a national concealed carry law passes or not, I would still advise you to carry your gun. I would still advise you to protect yourself, because there are crazy people out there that will hurt you and your family. If you found the information in this video helpful, subscribe to the channel, follow me on Facebook. And if you want to learn how to use those firearms, come on out to Valor Ridge and we'll teach you how to do just that. This is Reid Henrichs with Valor Ridge reminding you, the lessons that we learn are written on the tombstones of others. We'll see you on the ridge.